Hey, and good morning. I'm Angela, and I'm here with Omuugn today. And today we're sharing insights and wisdom from Omuugn. And this is page 127 to 134. And today we're talking about coherence. Now, coherence is a really interesting topic because it has us asking the question, are your words and actions and deeds in cohesive and alignment with your life? So I'm really excited for today's conversation. Please help me welcome Omuugn. Hi, Omuugn. How are you today?
Well, good morning. It's a beautiful pre-winter day in Eastern Oregon. It's cold and rainy and just a beautiful fall day, so we're excited.
Well, I appreciate you taking time out of your cold, rainy day. It would be easy to roll over and pull the covers back over your head and say, I'm not doing this today. But tell us, part of your life is you've made some commitments, and your actions as you're showing up here today are very cohesive with those commitments. Tell us in your own words, what is coherence?
Well, everything is kind of networked together. And sometimes we try to isolate things without realizing that they're tied to other things. Sometimes when I work on a project, I will get my pruners and go to work on the project, and I realize that my wheelbarrow is full of something else. I have to go empty my wheelbarrow. And when I go get my wheelbarrow, I find out that I have a flat tire on the wheelbarrow and I have to repair that first. And one thing leads to another, and sometimes I have to do 4 or 5 or 6 things before I get to what I'm trying to do. Everything fits together in a certain way. Patterns fit together, cycles fit together. And coherence is when everything is working together, when you're in alignment with everything. One of the problems that we have in the world today is that things are not coherent. And we try to solve this problem or that problem without realizing that everything is tied together and everything needs to work a certain way to be successful. So coherency is how things fit together, how they mesh, how they support one another, how they're synergistically related. Coherence is kind of the idea that makes everything work really well in relationships, in projects that we're working on, in all of the challenges that we face. Sometimes we don't stop to wonder if things are coherent, but that makes all the difference in the world if we can add coherency to whatever it is that we're doing.
So I've got a question for you. If you're new to the concept of coherence, how do you recognize that there is or there is not coherence in your activities?
Well, first of all, you have to have a basic idea of what coherence is. Coherence is kind of a term that not many of us use frequently. And so we haven't really given the time and effort to understand coherence. For example, in speech and communication, the way sentences are put together, the way punctuation is used, the way we utilize words on different levels for like college people or kindergarten children, the thing that we're trying to accomplish has to be coherent within itself. A lot of times we try to communicate with someone, and our idea of the concept and their idea are two totally different things. So when we say something, we assume that the other person understands what we're saying. And the other person assumes that what they're understanding is what you're trying to communicate, when many times that's really not the case at all. So the way our language is put together needs to be coherent. In other words, all of the parts and pieces and punctuations and inflections and vocabulary and everything that we're utilizing to communicate needs to be in place for communication to take place so that both parties can understand each other and communicate on a very exacting basis without making a lot of assumptions or guesswork. We want to learn to communicate clearly, and that clearliness is a result of its coherency. If things are incoherent, we have all kinds of problems.
As you're speaking, I just realized that this lesson needs to be attached to Marriage 101 because as I got married, there was a lack of coherence in our communication. And it wasn't until about maybe year 19 that we were married that I was like, wait a second, this is not working for me. This is not coherent. And I went in and I just stopped. I said, okay, however we were communicating in the past, it's come to a grinding halt. I no longer read minds. And I said, so from now on, moving forward, you must use your words. And so, like I would say, are you hungry? I'm making a sandwich for breakfast. And he would say, well, I haven't eaten since yesterday. Okay, I don't know what that means. Does that mean you would like a sandwich? Yes. Or are you hungry right now? Would you like me to make you something? And he would say, well, the last thing I ate was a muffin. Dude, that doesn't make any sense. It's not coherent. Do you want something right now? I'm making a sandwich. Yes or no? And I would literally just stop and just wait. Like, I need a coherent answer. Use all the words. So I think this is an awesome idea. And since I stopped, I mean, I literally consciously stopped reading minds. I said, I've become so good at reading minds that it's not fair because this is not a good way to communicate. So use all the words. So I love this. This is going to encourage us all to think in different terms and think to communicate better.
Well, marriage is a good example, but actually all relationships are based on the same idea. For example, there's a relationship between spouses. There is a relationship between parents and children. There's a relationship between siblings. And there are principles and ideas and concepts that need to be in place for all of those relationships to be successful. And so we need to spend more time looking at something specifically, like you're saying with the marriage. How can I communicate more effectively? How can I understand my spouse better so that we're on the same page on the things that we do? Siblings sort of, they have a lot of different ways of arriving at a conclusion. Sometimes it's through fighting and quarreling or arguing or yelling or screaming or all different kinds of things. We need to teach our children how to communicate effectively and how to put all of the ingredients of a strong relationship into place. For example, family relationships, when you're related to someone, siblings share the same DNA. Parents don't. They come from two different places, and so their DNA is different. But all the siblings have the same DNA, but they're all individual and they're different because of the genes that are turned on. It's called the epigenetics. That construction makes everyone unique in their own way. And so we need to teach people how to interact with each other in a very mature, grown-up way. And that's hard with little tiny children. We have to give them examples and operate on a different basis. But they need to understand the principles that make everything coherent so that they can interact with each other in a productive way, in an optimistic way, in a fun way, in a cheerful way. Life should be kind of enjoyable. And so everything that we can do to make life enjoyable, irregardless of what the relationship is, it might be just a friendship. There are certain things that make a friendship really strong and cohesive. And there are things that kind of tear a friendship down. Maybe it's an inconsistency in the time that we put into the relationship, or maybe we've made assumptions about how the other person feels or how often they would like us to show up. We have a neighbor that when she knocks on the door, we kind of scatter and go in different directions because she wants to take up a lot of our time, and she's kind of a negative person. And she has all kinds of problems that she wants to share. And we're not eager to take the time to listen to all of her problems, although we do interact with her in a positive way. but you need to draw lines and have boundaries, and all of those things are part of the coherency. If you let people take away your energy, take away your joyfulness, take away this and that or the other, after a while you become incoherent. And that's what we try to avoid. So all of the things that you can understand and put into a relationship that make it the relationship that you prefer, then you're successful in becoming more and more coherent. And just as a principle, we're never perfect. If we make our marriage, for example, coherent today, other things will crop up in the future and we will have insights into things. So we need to be flexible. Everything is changing except the first three laws. And as changes occur, we need to be adaptable, and we need to realize that life is not going to progress just as we design it in plan A. We're going to have plan B, C, and D all the time, challenges and obstacles to overcome. So we need to be able to develop the traits and skills that enable us to handle those kinds of things. That's part of the coherent formula, is being adaptable and flexible and understanding and so forth.
Well, as you explain that, and it's interesting because when we think about being consciously aware of how we are communicating with other people, I've become painfully aware since AI was introduced to the mainstream that my form of communication in my head was different than how other people perceive it as well. And it's easy for us to say, this is not working out for me. Well, when you try to explain to ChatGPT, for example, this is not working out for me, it does not know what this is. And so it will say, can you give me more details? What is it this that you're referring to? And you have to say, oh, well, I'm working on a book. And it will say, I don't understand that. What are you doing in the book? And you say, oh, I'm in a Microsoft Word document and I'm trying to format a book. Okay, now it has a reference. And so I've had to start thinking in different terms because it's easy for me to go into the room and to talk to either an employee or to my spouse and to say things like, I'm really frustrated today because everything is falling apart. And we have these generalizations. Well, what is everything? And what is it that's falling apart? And why are you saying these words? What do you expect them to do? What information do you want to convey to them that they can do something with? So it's easier for me now to stop, and I have to stop and think of everything in terms of a prompt. Like if I'm going to go in the other room and I'm going to blow a gasket, what is my purpose for blowing the gasket? What do I hope to achieve? And now if I hope to achieve that, which of the people in the room are going to be the most receptive to me blowing this gasket? And what do I want them to do? And so would it make more sense if I said, and I walked in specifically and I said to Brooke, hey, Brooke, can you help me finish this project with this particular client that we can find in this particular reference point? And she can say, yes, I can. Here's how we do that. Okay, now all of a sudden it's alienated everyone else that would just like catch wind of my blowing a gasket, take it all personally when it had nothing to do with them at all. So now I can be laser focused in my questions and I know what the outcome is going to look like when it comes back to me. And it's really helped me reframe exactly what I'm trying to accomplish. So if I'm trying to fix a meal and I'm trying to make a sandwich for breakfast and I'm going to go in the other room and I'm going to speak to my husband and say, hey, would you like a sandwich? It's easier for me to say, by 11 o'clock, we're going to have lunch and I'm fixing a particular type of sandwich. Would you like this type or this type? And he says, I would like this type. And I say, great, there you go. Then it's very specific because I gave a very specific prompt with a specific outcome. So it just the creating the cohesiveness, I think we have to think of it in terms differently. Would you agree? Or is there a better way to do that?
Well, I agree. You know, it's all in communication. And if you make your communication clear, it just solves a lot of situations. Where you give someone a choice between two specific things, they'll say A or B, and that's pretty clear. So yeah, the more clear you make it, the more clear the answer will be. But you used a phrase that's kind of interesting. You said, I'm laser focused. The word laser is light amplification by frequency stimulation. And the laser light is coherent light. Coherent light is a different kind of light than diffused light that we, for example, receive from the sunshine or from the lighting in our house. A laser light is very, very focused. That's why you used it in that context. A laser light is collimated, it's in step phase, and it's monochromatic. In other words, it has a very, very, very narrow bandwidth of coherency. And it's what makes lasers so adaptable to certain things, for example, like creating holograms. To create holograms, we have to create interference patterns with coherent light in order to create a 3D image from a two-dimensional object, for example. So when you move into the world of physics and optics and mathematics, one of the things that makes them so dependable as sciences is that they are coherent. Their formulations, their processes, and in your lifelong publications, you will find that there are certain things that make your work coherent. And as we apply these principles that are across the board coherent, it just adds a structure to our life that it gives us comfort and security, because we're always looking for truth and what reality is. Take music, for example. We all enjoy music, or most everyone enjoys music. And even the people who don't enjoy music enjoy really dissonant sounds, which I won't get into those. We call them music, but they're really not. It's sort of anti-music. But there's a coherency in music itself. For example, there's melodic coherence, which is the logical progression of notes and melodies that have a beginning and a middle and an end, and they flow naturally, and they create a sense of purpose and emotion. And there are harmonious chords that we put together. There's rhythmic coherence, where you have beat and tempo and time signatures and harmonious chords, and there's rhythmic coherency. There are all kinds of coherency in music itself, which makes it really enjoyable. And in the background of all of the movies that we watch, the music creates the emotional attachment to whatever's happening at that particular time. It creates the moods and the intenseness, and it can be frightening or it can be shocking. We can use music for a lot of different things, and everything we're trying to create in music has to fit together coherently. That's what transmits the emotion to us in the way that it does. And so the sciences are put together in a way that we can depend on them and we understand them because they are consistent and they have that quality about them that we tend to trust. And we need to incorporate those kinds of things into our own personal traits. One of the reasons that I wrote the books was I realized that we were put together with a lot of different characteristics and traits that make us very unique individuals. But we're not very coherent in some of those traits and characteristics. And that's where we have the problems that we face in life. If we can identify traits and put the research and understanding into that trait, it gives us a sense of coherency because we see how things fit together. And a lot of traits work with each other. For example, we talked about abundance. Well, abundance is also attached to trust. It's attached to a positive attitude. It's attached to many, many, many other different traits. And so the traits work together, creating a network of coherency for whatever trait we're working on. We have support from other traits, other characteristics that assist us in accomplishing our objective. So we should utilize as many of those variables as we can, because the more variables we use, the more coherent everything becomes in a broader scale. Things work together to help each other, like patching the tire on the wheelbarrow and then using the wheelbarrow and getting everything ready for the job. Those are all different traits and characteristics that make the trait that we're working on more understandable, and it becomes more of a reality to us, and we can trust the systems and processes. One thing that kind of comes to mind is nature. If we look at nature, we see how everything fits together. You know, you have the seasonal things, how the trees will produce their leaves and the new growth, then the leaves will fall in the fall and they will decompose, and it creates the soil that other trees and other plants can grow in. And the bacteria that lives in those processes and that makes those processes work, everything just is in place in nature. The way water comes down from the mountains and goes through the cycling, you know, vaporizing from the oceans and forming clouds and dropping their precipitation in the high areas. And we have streams and rivulets and all things coming down. They're just a beautiful coherency in nature. And those systems have opened the eyes of a lot of our people. For example, there's a scientist by the name of Victor Schoenberg, who was watching water come down from the river, from the mountains. And he would realize that the water doesn't just run straight down the mountain. It goes in little eddies and it circles. Sometimes it circles clockwise and sometimes it circles counterclockwise. And he began to experiment with water, and he found out that water, as it comes down in the process from the mountains to the ocean, that it becomes coherent. And the water that we usually drink from our faucets is incoherent water, because we run that water through machines and pumps and different kinds of pipes and right angles and all kinds of things. And you can actually make your water coherent by creating a device which circulates the water clockwise and then counterclockwise. I actually built one of those for myself, so that the water that I drink is coherent water, because coherent water reacts in our body differently. It's a slightly smaller water molecule. It's more permeable to the membranes of our cells, and our body can utilize the water much better. We can stay hydrated much more easily if our water is coherent. So coherency is across the board in everything that you look at: nature's processes, the sciences, optics, the language that we speak, the relationships that we have. Coherency is really a critical component that we need to emphasize, and we need to understand more fully all of the time.
So if you were going to become coherent in your life, where would you start?
Well, you always start with anything where you are. If I'm going to become more coherent I will have to pick something like, say, music. I just shared with some of the concepts with music that would make it more coherent. One of the critical things in music that some people don't understand is that there are pure frequencies. They're called solfeggio frequencies. And every frequency has certain realities connected to it. For example, every frequency has a color, and every frequency has a texture, and every frequency has an impact on our emotions. For example, the frequency of 528 hertz is called the love frequency, because it harmonizes all of the DNA programming that we have in our bodies. When we listen to a pure tone, and the way pure tones work is that if you listen to a constant tone your mind turns the tone off. So you have to have a variation in the tone. So if you're listening to 528 hertz, for example, it will play the tone, and then the tone will drift off to a little bit off, and then it will come back again. And the way that it drifts off and comes back engages your mind, and you're able to absorb that tone much, much better. You can absorb a tone much, 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 much better if you make the tone yourself rather than just listening to it. So if you hum a tone, it engages your vocal cords and your lungs and your diaphragm and all the elements of your body that makes that tone resonate within you in a different way than if you're just listening to the tone. So everything that you add to it makes it more coherent, and your body is able to utilize the tone and the possibilities contained within the tone to create mood or emotion or understanding. You can do many, many things with music, utilizing the frequency variations and beautiful music. For example, the old composers like Beethoven and Bach, they would tune their instruments. They use A as a tuning point, like for orchestras. Everybody tunes to the same note. And their tuning was 432 hertz. And the 432 hertz is a system of tuning into what we call sacred geometric patterns that come through the dimensions from the creation blueprint. And society, for some reason, has changed the A to 440 hertz. So all of the orchestras worldwide will tune to 440 hertz now. And that cuts off all of the possibilities contained within the musical scale. And so man has changed the nature of the reality of music for probably a nefarious purpose. Because music used to interact with people in a much, much different way. There's a science called cymatics, which is visually seeing the resonant frequencies. For example, if you take a plate and cover it with sand and put it between two speakers resonating the same sound, the music will generate patterns in the sand, and you can actually see the effect that the sounds that you're listening to have in the sand. And if it's tuned to 432 hertz, there will be beautiful mandalas and beautiful geometric patterns that will form in the sand. And if you play dissonant frequencies, the sand will have all garbledygook in it, and the patterns will not be coherent. So cymatics tells us that coherency in music, tuning to different frequencies, has a profound effect. And cymatics lets us actually see those effects with our own eyes to verify the concept. So you can prove it scientifically or empirically that the sounds, pure sounds, have a particular influence on us. And so we want to make sure that the music that we listen to is coherent. And I'll give you just a quick example. Yanni, everyone's familiar with Yanni. He tunes his music to 432 hertz. And his music is very uplifting and positive, and everyone enjoys listening to Yanni because he's actually tuned to those frequencies, whereas other musicians don't, and you don't have the same impact. You don't experience the same impact. So that's just an example.
Well, that's a really dynamic example. Thank you for sharing that with us. You mentioned earlier in our conversation about making your children aware of coherence in your life. And as a father of 19 kids, boy, do you have a lot of coherence that I'm sure that you mastered over the years. For a parent that is wanting to bring their family in alignment and create more coherence, what is a good springboard or starting point for that parent that maybe just be learning coherence for the first time?
That question can go in many different directions. What we did in the beginning, I didn't really understand a lot about coherency in the beginning, but I had a sort of an intuitive feel for what had to happen. For example, I felt that if the older, I had no idea how many children I would have, but I was thinking maybe 4 or 5 or how, I don't know
Well,
how I got to
thank
19 is another story. But anyway, I felt if the older ones were trained, as the younger ones came up, they would see that example. And instead of having to train every child, the older children would help in the training by exemplifying the training that they had received. And intuitively, I had the same feeling with music. I felt that there was music that was very, very uplifting music. And all of my children wanted to have their own radios and listen to their own stuff and go to sleep at night listening to rock and metal and all this different kinds of music. And I basically said, we're in a kingdom and our kingdom is structured a certain way. And I'm trying to put the best structure that I know into this kingdom. And so while you're my stewards, while you're growing up, I would like you to respect my system of governance and respect the things that I'm trying to accomplish. And I communicated that very clearly to the children. In fact, we almost daily had family councils where we would sit down and go through things and evaluate things and understand things and explain things, so that the children were kind of on board with how I understood things. And I said, when you get older and you leave the home and you go out and create your own life, you can create your kingdom any way you want to create it. You can listen to any kind of music you want to listen to. You can choose your friends. You can do everything the way you want your kingdom to be. But while you're here, I would like you to respect my kingdom. We didn't like the public school system because there are a lot of things taught there that are contrary to my personal belief system. So we homeschooled our children, and we were able to teach them according to the best principles that we knew. And time has borne out that most of those decisions were accurate. There's a lot of trouble. There's a lot of trouble in the public school system today, as everything has become woke. When the new Supreme Court justice was being interviewed by the congressional panel, they asked her what a woman was, if she could define a woman. And she said, I'm not a biologist. I can't answer that question. It has become so muddled in our processing now on a governmental and educational level that the person that we just put on to the Supreme Court doesn't really know what the difference is between a man and a woman. And the things that we're trying to accept as normal in the biologies are very, very abnormal. In our industry, if someone wants to identify as they or their or a number or whatever it might be, we're almost being forced to accept that and to relate to them as their preference. So we will call a woman they instead of her or she or you or it. And it's very, very weird. It's incoherent. And so the society is doing so many different things that are incoherent. We talked about food in making choices in our last meeting. Why would people put herbicides and pesticides and poison in our drinking water and poison in the air we breathe? and genetically modify our food, and every one of those things is incoherent. Every facet of our life, every governmental thing, every educational thing, every business thing, anything you look at, whether it's the arts and sciences, in the design of things, in societal values, international relations with other companies, and in the environmental conservation ideas. We have so many things that are incoherent that it's just mind-boggling. We need to start looking at people who run for offices and find out if they are coherent or incoherent individuals. Because if you have an incoherent individual making your laws and determining societal standards, only incoherency and a bad result can come out of that. If someone doesn't understand what coherency is, they shouldn't run for public office, and we should not support them. So there are a lot of things to keep in mind. Coherency is across the board applicable in every area that you look at, every trait that you have, every characteristic that you have. Every decision that you make should be a coherent decision. And so that's pretty broad.
That is pretty broad. And so then that brings me to the question, how do you know what is coherent? Because if you think something is coherent, but maybe it isn't, how would you know?
Well, that's why you have to research whatever it is. Coherency didn't just happen. Scientists through the ages have discovered things, and their formulations and their algorithms and their understanding of the Pythagorean theorem and this and that was added over time. And so the coherency kind of coalesces over time in a certain way. And the same thing with our lives. We don't start out coherent. We start out where we are. And so it has to be an objective that we have. We have to, first of all, determine that we want to become coherent. We want reality to be what we prefer to experience in reality. We want to understand what truth is. And so we would start studying about truth. We'd look at the philosophy of truth. We would look at the time-honored precepts that have been accepted by society. We would look at truth in a lot of different ways, perspectives. And it's like the people feeling the different parts of an elephant, trying to figure out what an elephant was, the blind men. If you put all of that together, you kind of find out what an elephant is. But if you take any one of those things, it's incoherent and it gives you just a piece. In fact, the way I look at the whole thing is a puzzle. I think a puzzle is the perfect picture that we're trying to create here in answer to your question. If I'm going to create something, I have a picture of that in my mind. I have to create a picture of what that looks like. For example, if I want to be a certain kind of a person, I have to visualize what that person is. Do I want that person to be happy and have a sense of humor? Do I want that person to be really sad and sort of serious about everything? Do I want that person to have a lot of friends and interact with people in a very social way? Do I want my children to be able to interact with people in a social way? Whatever it is you're looking at, you have to look at the parameters of that thing. You have to see a clear picture of it. And then there will be pieces that will fit into that puzzle. For example, every trait that we have is a piece that fits into the puzzle of who we are. And so if we look at our traits individually, our characteristics, and then we define each characteristic and understand it, it becomes a piece that fits into that puzzle that makes sense. So if running a business, every aspect of your business is a piece to the puzzle. You want to determine what your business will be, what you want it to look like, how you want it to function, the kind of people that you want to work in your business. The more clearly you can create the picture of what you want your business to be, the more easy it becomes for you to identify the pieces of the puzzle that fit into the picture so that it becomes coherent. So it comes down to understanding everything. If you want to accomplish something, you have to understand it, create a picture of it, and then see what pieces fit into that to make it coherent, if that makes sense.
It does. And if I hear what you're saying correctly, in order to create a cohesiveness that goes from, a pattern of things like you brought up business, for example, I think the most coherent thing that we've done in our business is when we've articulated what it is we're trying to accomplish. And we've created a coherence to then create a template so that it can be replicated over and over and over again. It's like the planting in the gardens, and you're an avid gardener, but you have a system that's in place that works with the cohesiveness of the weather and the seasons and the planting and the composting and all of the things that take you from planting to harvest. And then when you are able to duplicate that, it's a series of replications so that you do this season after season after season, and you know what time canning season is, and you harvest the stuff, and then you have all of the cans and the bottles lined up, and you know exactly what has to be done in order for your food storage for the winter. And I've watched you year after year as you repeated those pieces of cohesion. And so I think it's really interesting when we start thinking in terms of, if I'm in alignment, then I can template that process, and I don't have to keep reinventing the wheel over and over again, which is exhausting, by the way.
Yeah, and there are things that work against coherence. And I think we need to look at those for just a moment. For example, if you're always changing what your business looks like, no one really understands where you're coming from or what you're trying to accomplish. So consistency is important. So inconsistency kind of creates incoherence. There are always external influences. For example, in society today, there are many things that I don't agree with in society. We've talked about some of those. And so they're trying to influence us in certain ways. For example, the media. In the olden days, reporters used to go out and they would investigate things, and they would discover things, and they would ask questions. And now all of the news people receive their information from the AP news process. And so if you have 100 different news channels, they will all say the same identical thing. Maybe you have seen some of those. I've seen presentations where they will have like 50 or 70 different newscasters, and they will all be syncing the same message. They will all be saying exactly the same thing. So there are those external influences that, if we're not careful, they can influence the way we think and the way we perceive things. So if we want to be coherent, we have to be very, very careful of the information that we allow into our framework. There's also a lack of clarity. If you don't form that picture, if you don't really know what your business is going to look like or what you want to accomplish, then you can drift around here and there, and nobody really knows what's going on. They don't know the processes and procedures, or if they'll be the same tomorrow. There's also this thing called procrastination, where there are things that should be done on a very, very timely basis, but we have a tendency to put things off for many different reasons. And procrastination and incoherency go together hand in glove. So if you want to be coherent, you can't procrastinate things. Things have to be done on a timely basis when they're required. Also, we've talked about self-reflection, where you actually sit down and take the time to analyze yourself, analyze your processes, analyze your strengths and your weaknesses. How do you learn? How do you learn more quickly? Are you a visual learner, or do you have to have a hands-on experience? And all of your children will learn maybe in a different way. And so you have to be tuned into every child and how to optimize their learning capacity, because children learn in many, many different ways. And so if you don't take the time to look at those things, well, you can get behind really, really quickly. There's also sometimes we overcommit. There's so many demands on our lives that we try to do everything. And I think you find this in your business. You can't do everything. You have to start hiring people and assigning things so that everyone carries their share of the burden. And you're a lot more productive if many of you are working on the same project doing different things, because you can't do it all. If you overcommit and try to do everything yourself, you'd burn yourself out very quickly and not be very efficient. So a lot of times, even with families or whatever situation you're in, we overcommit. We promise things that we can't deliver. We try to do too many things. There's too much on our plate. How can I exercise and how can I eat right and still work my job, spend quality time with my family and interact with my friends and be involved in the community? And it goes on and on and on. After a while, you're not effective anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to create boundaries and schedule times and set goals and sort of put processes into place, create habits that make your life easier, make your life more efficient. Maybe you can do 2 or 3 things at once. One thing I had to do with 19 children was whatever we did together as a family so that we could have quality time as a family, and yet we were spending time together and sort of time with each person because they were involved in that process. We'd go for walks together. We'd go to ball games together. We played ball together. We did things together. And so everyone was involved individually and yet collectively. It's the way I had to schedule us because I didn't have time to spend individual time with every person like I should have, ideally. But you have to schedule your world so that it works. And whatever situation you're in might be particular to you. And so you have to look at your world and say, this is how I want my world to function. This will make my world coherent and workable and productive. And this is how I can maximize myself. And there's also an inertia involved. When you're doing the same thing the same way all of the time, you have a tendency to do that the same way all of the time. But new software is coming out all of the time, new business methodologies, new trends in consumer buying, new trends in how people buy either online or from a hard store, a regular store. So if you're not aware of those trends and the changing things that are happening, if you're doing the same thing all the same way, you'll be like a Sears and Roebuck that just eventually just goes out of business. How can you be the biggest retailer in the United States and then go bankrupt and go out of business? You have to be not tuned in with what's happening in consumerism in your country. And also there's a lack of accountability. If you do things the same way all of the time, but you're not accountable to anyone, sometimes you can miss the mark. Whereas if you have to report to someone and say, this is what I did last week, and they say, well, that's good, but you should have done this or do this a different way. If you're not accountable, it's hard to stay on top of everything because you have a tendency to have bad habits or look at things in the same way all of the time when they've changed. There's also, for example, impatience. Sometimes we want to harvest our produce before it has time to grow. I remember many of my children would eat green peaches off the tree because they didn't want to let the peaches ripen. It was seldom that we would actually bring ripe fruit in off the trees because they would eat green peaches and green apples and they would pull things up before the carrots had a time to form they'd eat little tiny carrots instead of the big long carrots. Sometimes we're just, you're laughing because you were part of that.
I was one of those kids. That's true.
But sometimes we're just too impatient. Whatever we're trying to accomplish, there's usually some kind of a process involved, and we need to let the process go through that process in order to obtain the harvest at the right time. And sometimes we have a lack of support. Sometimes you're trying to do things and people think you're crazy. When we started homeschool, actually it was against the law in the state where we lived. And so we had to make some strong choices because I might end up in jail making the choices. But sometimes you don't have a support group that supports you in what you're trying to accomplish. And that can work against you accomplishing what you would like to in the time frame and how you would like it done. So if you want things to work really, really well and be coherent, it's ideal to have a support system that is on the same page with you, so that you sort of amplify each other and synergistically work together so that the outcome is better than any of you could do individually.
Well, if I hear you correctly, one thing that you said a moment ago is that inertia was important, but not to get too trapped up in the inertia that you keep doing things the same way over and over again and resist change that might come up on the horizon. And I see that as like the domino effect. If we get up every day and we have a series of dominoes that we stack together, and these would be little tiny minute habits that build on top of each other, that would then say, I'm going out to the wheelbarrow and I'm going to fix the wheelbarrow wheel so that I can then move the wheelbarrow. And it's a series of dominoes that then get you to the end result. I think you have the power of inertia behind you, but then when you can stand back, because the inertia is then doing its own thing after you hit that first domino, you can then tweak each of the little dominoes as needed to make those necessary changes, I think, that you're talking about as society introduces new pieces of software or as the accountability needs change for that particular thing. And I know for me, my day starts at 4:30 in the morning. And when I jump up in the morning, that's one domino. I got out of bed on time. And then I make my bed. That's the next domino. Then I say a prayer of gratitude that I had a great night's sleep and that I had a bed to sleep in. And that's domino number 3. And I turn around and there's a glass of water that I laid out for myself the night before, along with my vitamins. So the drinking of the water is domino number 4, and domino number 5 is the vitamins. Then I go out to my car. I put my gym bag in my car and I go to the gym. And through the series of things that I do in the morning, from saying hello to the person behind the desk and calling them by name and spending 30 seconds of interaction, finding out how they really are without it being about me or about just blowing by them and ignoring them, making these little tiny minute changes. Those are little dominoes. And by the time I've been up 40 minutes in the morning, I've got 11 dominoes that are already stacked in alignment for my day. And when you hit that first domino, it's kind of like everything starts flowing really smoothly through the course of your day because you have that momentum and inertia behind you. And you talked about having the support system that will guide you and that will have your back if things change. And I find that it's so tiny, but by creating all those little dominoes and creating that inertia, what happens is when something malfunctions, like I had a really bad day the other day, and I was inside the swimming pool and I was just in a grumpy mood. I woke up on the wrong side of the bed and I was like, I'm going to burn this out in the swimming pool. By the time I leave that locker room, I'm going to be in a good mood. If it kills me, you know, I was kicking it out in the swimming pool. And this lady comes over to me and she said, are you doing okay today? And it was interesting that she was sensitive enough to pick up that I was having a bad day. And I said, I'm not. I'm in a really grumpy mood today. And she said, I came over to wish you well. And you talk about having those support systems in place. This is a woman I have known, I kid you not, for 3 weeks. I met her 3 weeks ago when I joined this gym. But because all these little dominoes were stacked together, and every day I went out of my way to find out how she was doing, that now in a time where I needed the help and the roles were reversed, she came running over saying, hey, I came to lend a supportive hand and a listening ear. And I was like, whoa, wait a second. I have a new friend. How cool is that? And I felt her support in those moments. But what's really interesting is we don't go through life alone. And you talk about being in coherence with the world around us. but I think we have a participation in that. And when we just annihilate the world around us by like staying glued to our little devices or our smartphones, and we don't talk to people and we don't interact, I think we end up ruining a lot of that coherence. Because what's happening is when you are in alignment, when you are in coherence and you're on that frequency, you attract all of these things together that start coming into fruition that are there. It's like a pavement of a road that supports the drive that you're on. And I'm finding it so much easier when things are in alignment than when you're just kicking against every single thing you're doing and reinventing every single moment of every single day. That's just exhausting.
Well, that is a really, really good concept. Inertia can work for us or against us, and we need to be really sensitive to that. Sometimes we have really good habits. We eat the right foods, we get up early and we exercise, we go to the gym. If we create a habit that really supports what we're trying to accomplish, those are pieces in that puzzle that make the picture really clear. Then, yeah, we need to encourage that. But we also need to self-reflect and see the habits that don't support us. Sometimes we have good habits and bad habits, and they both have inertia. So we want to put inertia behind our good habits, and we want to take inertia away from our bad habits. And so, unless we take the time to actually sit down and become mindful and meditate and look at things, analyze things, sometimes a lot of things go under the carpet that we really don't identify and work on. For example, we have many, many traits. How many traits do we actually identify and work on? The average person probably has traits that they could really improve on. And sometimes we have good traits that we should amplify more and be more of whatever we are. I remember the first time that you came to Eastern Oregon, you had been in town a very short period of time, and I think you knew more people than I did in town in 2 or 3 days. You're more of an extrovert who interacts with people and asks questions, and you're aware of people. And I'm more of an introvert. I can sit in my study and study for a long period. In fact, my family went out to the coast. My wife wanted to spend some time with her sister, and they were gone for 4 days. And in those 4 days, I never left the house. I was just working on projects and just totally by myself, and I was totally content. So sometimes we have habits that don't really work in our behalf. If we want to be a social person and have friends and interact with people, sometimes we need to realize that and get out of our comfort zone and interact with people like you do at the gym, and you pick up another friend and you build a support system. That makes you more coherent. And if you don't do that, you're more incoherent. Some of the pieces in your puzzle are missing. And
In all due respect, though, I'm also an introvert and I don't do friendships very well. And I'm consciously focusing on that. And so my personal rule is 30 to 60 seconds. And so I feel like I can invest 30 to 60 seconds in a perfect stranger. And so every time I meet somebody, my goal is to learn their name and then to ask a question that would be easy just to move on by. Like, for example, I went into the gym the other day and there was a woman I'd never met sitting at the counter. And I said, "Hey, did you have a good weekend?" And she said, "Yes." I said, "What was the highlight?" Now I could have just said, "Okay, you had a great weekend, goodbye." And I could have walked on through. And she said, "Well, the highlight was I took my kids to a Halloween party." I said, "No." I said, "Are you one of those parents that dress up with your kids or do you just send them out on their own?" She goes, "No, we dressed up." I said, "No." And she said, "Yes, this is in the same 30 seconds." I before pulls out her phone and she shows me a picture of her and her husband and her kids in their Halloween costumes. And I started clapping. I said, "Go, mom." I said, "Look at you. You're one of those moms that makes the commitment to dress up with their kids." Now, we built a friendship in 30 seconds. I kid you not. Now I got to go in. I got to do my workout because I'm on my way. I'm in a hurry. But I spent 30 seconds building a friendship from beginning to end. And on the way, as I'm leaving, I said, remind me of your name. I never knew her name. She said, it's Nikki. I said, Nikki, thank you for showing me the Halloween pictures. And I said, I'll catch you on the flip side. So now every time I see her, hey, Nikki, how you doing? It's not a full friendship. I don't know anything about Nikki other than she has kids and a family and she dresses up for Halloween. But 30 to 60 seconds is a very tiny investment. But those investments then are people who have your back when you need the support later on. And so my encouragement is, and I'm encouraging myself, because like you, it's really easy to get caught up in my own little world and to not take those 30 or 60 seconds, because I can justify, I do not have time for social interaction. I do not. But the 30 to 60 seconds, I can squeeze that in.
Well, I know that our time is about up, but let me just say that coherency is an important concept. And we need to start looking at everything as to whether or not it's coherent in our lives, because our life will just be richer and more full, and we will be more successful in what we're trying to accomplish. We'll have stronger relationships, better families, if we're coherent and we can see those clear pictures of what we're trying to accomplish and understand all of the pieces that go into that puzzle.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And for those of you that are watching the replay or joining us here, this is from the Insights and Wisdom of Omuugn, where every Saturday morning we gather for a few minutes and we unpack the next lesson in how we can become more coherent. So I want to encourage you, if you haven't already got your copy, this is part 1 of 2 in a series in the Insights and Wisdom of Omuugn. That's it for today. And we'll see you guys again next week when we join together with Omuugn and we cover the next topic in the Insights and Wisdom.